Abraham Lincoln Comes Home by Robert Burleigh. Abraham Lincoln comes home. The buggy rumbled past the barn and through the rusty gate. A single lantern dangled from the near side of the horse's harness. The lantern cast shadows that rose and fell with each bounce. Luke's father flipped the reins and called to the horse in a soft voice. Luke lurched sideways as the buggy crossed over the old wood bridge. It was so dark he could hardly tell where the land ended and the sky began. The road stretched out. Where was the train now? Luke half drowsed to the steady rhythm of the hooves on the hard dirt. The train tracks were still miles away, next to Hardin's mill. Luke loved trains. Trains took you places. One day, his father said they would take a train to Washington to see the president's house. Tonight's train, though, was different. It carried the body of Abraham Lincoln. The boy thought of the dead president with his sad face. Some folks said it was the saddest face they had ever seen. But Luke knew if he had talked to Abe Lincoln, he would have liked him. The buggy eased to a halt. Luke breathed the smell of metal mixed with the faint scent of lilacs. He climbed down and stood with his father close to the iron rails. Bonfires blazed. Others were here too, waiting for the funeral train. Yes, the train was coming. Somewhere the wheels were turning. How far it had come. Day after day, night into morning, past cities and towns with tolling bells, past speeches in silence, past black drapes, heaped roses, archways of green leaves, and the sound of muffled drums. Luke squinted. There! A tiny flicker was moving very slowly across a field. Up and down the track, torches flared, swoosh, swoosh, like giant fireflies. Surprised by the brightness, horses whinnied and stamped. The train rattled into view. The clapper clanged, the engine grew immense. Luke could see Abe Lincoln's picture above the cowcatcher. He felt the ground shiver under his feet. He glanced up at his father. In the eerie orange glow, tears were streaming down his father's cheeks. Luke had never before seen his father cry. Engulfed in the harsh roar of iron on iron, Luke counted the cars one by one. The coffin was in the next to last car. The windows were so dark. Luke stood on his tiptoes and raised his arm and waved. The noise faded. The prairie swallowed the clack, clack, click all the way into nothing. An owl hooted. Suddenly a lone voice shattered the stillness. You're coming home, Abraham Lincoln. Home at last. For a long time no one stirred. No one spoke. And then it was over. A thin line of light rested on the distant horizon. Luke hoisted himself into the buggy's sideboard and tumbled in. In the cool air, he snuggled against his father's warm shoulder. He was tired now. The sound of the buggy wheels made him think of train wheels still turning. It was the last thing he remembered before he fell asleep. Abraham Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth in Ford's Theater, Washington, D.C. on April 14, 1865, and died the following morning. It was just the week after the end of the Civil War. Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, decided the president, should he be buried in Springfield, Illinois, where he lived his adult life and had gained recognition as a political leader. After funeral services in Washington, Lincoln's body was taken by train to Springfield. The train roughly followed the route Lincoln had taken on coming to Washington in 1861. Stopped for additional funeral services in other northern cities, the total journey took 13 days. Millions of people passed the dead president's casket or watched the huge processions, walked by the hearse through city streets. The funeral train was greeted by many more mourners in hundreds of small towns. Wherever the slow-moving train passed, rain or shine, day or night, people gathered by the tracks to pay their final respects. One historian said it was the mightiest outpouring of national grief the world had ever seen. A few years later, before his death, Lincoln told his wife that he wished to be buried in some quiet place. He was buried on May 4th, 1865, on a grassy hill in Oak Ridge Cemetery in Springfield, Illinois.